So earlier this week, the White House admitted that Indian purchases of Russian oil do not violate US sanctions, but they urged India, and I'm quoting here, to think about where you want to stand when the history books are written. So tonight on Left, Right and Centre, India imports discounted Russian oil. Are we on the right side of history? To discuss the pragmatism of diplomacy, we'll have Michael Kugelman, Deputy Director and Senior Associate for South Asia at the Asia Programme, Meera Shankar, former Ambassador, Ksenia Kondrateva, Senior Russian Journalist, R.S. Pandey, former Petroleum Secretary of the Government of India, and Manju Seth, former diplomat. Manju Seth, let's start with you. At a time when international crude oil prices have surged to over $100 a barrel, that's a steep cost for a country like ours. Indian oil companies finalizing deals to purchase discounted or Russian crude oil at cheap discounts. Pragmatism versus being at the right side of history, quote unquote. Your response?
This is an interesting narrative that the US is trying to project of talking of right side of history. I feel, who's writing the history? Whose history is it? From whose perspective is this history being written? So it is a little, difficult and a dicey question, really. Whose side are we on? And of course, our needs, our interests, I think, have to be paramount. And there are no sanctions on this purchase of oil, from the Russian companies. The US has imposed and recommended to other countries. But if it is in our interest to get this oil, this specially discounted oil, I think we will buy it because our energy needs, in any case, we import, I think, 80%, more than 80% of oil, 85% of our crude oil from outside. And from Russia, normally, I think from what I read some figures, 2% or 4% we are importing. So it's not a huge amount in our energy basket. And as I said, we haven't condemned Russia, but neither have we supported. We have taken a very nuanced approach, even at the UN. And I think that we want peace. And we want people to cease fire. We want both sides to cease fire. We've been saying it again and again that the fighting has to stop.
Okay. So Ambassador Meera Shankar, you've been ambassador to the United States. Yes, it is true what Manju Seth is saying. We don't import it's not a large percentage of our oil imports from Russia. It's a small amount. But the United States says that this implies that India is supporting the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Does this import of crude oil from Russia at discounted prices, this move, does it further strain the relationship between Washington and New Delhi, a relationship that has already been tested recently by India's recent procurements of advanced Russian air defense systems?
Well, I know that this is something which does not resonate well in Washington, and opinion there, particularly in Congress, has been pretty critical of the Indian decision. But it's, consistent with the stand that India has taken on the issue of Ukraine, basically without taking sides in the dispute. It has not supported Russia, and nor has it supported Ukraine. It has urged both sides to stop fighting, to have a ceasefire, and to seek a resolution through diplomacy, which, according to me, is really the only way the fighting can stop. So in that sense, we see also that it's important not to push Russia into a corner where it just, thinks that expanding the fighting is the only way out. I think if negotiations are to be successful. Now, having said that, I think that there are two things which have informed India's approach to sanctions in the past. One is that India has implemented sanctions which have been approved by the UN, compulsory sanctions which have been approved by the UN. We have not implemented sanctions which have been approved by a country or a group of countries. In this case, the sanctions have been imposed by the US, Europe, and allies such as Australia, Japan, and South Korea. On the oil and gas, actually the sanctions are even more limited because it's only the US, UK, which has said it will phase out by the end of 2022 any imports from Russia, and Australia and Canada, which have imposed sanctions on Russian energy imports. But Europe continues to import from Russia both oil and gas, and it's the largest importer of Russian energy in the world. The second largest importer is China, which also continues to import from Russia oil and gas, and it is also looking to make investments to buy out or to make investments in Russian energy.
But you mentioned China, Ambassador, and the US sees India as this critical partner for countering China's influence, right? Rising influence in Asia, and that's what India hopes to get support and cooperation. That's what unites. One of the reasons that, you know, India and the US are on the same side of history, let's put it that way. How does this actually, do you think, affect Indo-US relations? Yes, it's not gone down well in Congress, but as we've had many episodes like this in the past, we've had hiccups, we've had bumps in our relationship, but we've always heard that same statement that in the oldest and the largest democracy, we have too much of a history, too much commonalities, that this is not really going to be something that's going to be hard to overcome. I ask you this because this development comes ahead of that India-US 2+2 dialogue, which after several false starts is finally expected to take place in the first week of April.
Well, I would hope that we are able to navigate this successfully without it impacting the broader relationship, because our interests in the Asia-Pacific converge very closely, and that is what is driving the relationship and the cooperation that we have with the US as a strategic partner and as a member of the Quad. I think it's also important to highlight that we are not an alliance partner with the US. We are a strategic partner of the US. And we are a member of the Quad, which has been described as a diplomatic grouping, not as a military alliance. So actually, we are not an alliance partner of the US, but they are a very, very important strategic partner. And we certainly hope to work with them in the Asia-Pacific region, where we have closely matching interests.
A very good reminder there by the ambassador here, saying we're a strategic partner, and this is strategy, diplomacy, pragmatism. It's all about strategy. Mr. Pandey, R.S. Pandey, former Petroleum Secretary of the Government of India, imports make up 85% of India's oil needs. That is the reality, and we've seen a surge in oil prices following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That threatens to fan India's inflation. It stretches our finances, it hurts our growth at a time when we've just emerged from a pandemic-induced slowdown. So you see this as the only way option for India?
Well, what does India do? If India doesn't buy Russian oil, then China will buy more of it. Many countries in the Europe themselves are buying it. And if the Russian production goes down, as the IEA has predicted, then the oil prices globally will really shoot up, and that will hurt not only India, not only other consumers, but the entire world economy. So what India is doing is in its consumers' interests, in the interest of its own economy, and also in the interest of the world economy, and that is without violating any sanctions by the US. It is acting in self-interest as well as in global interest, and therefore it is the only natural alternative as on today that it buys crude from Russia. It has tempered the prices. It is also available at a discount, and that is also helping us in a way that prices are not being revised drastically upwards. Otherwise, the way the global situation has worsened since the war, the last 3 to 4 weeks.
Correct.
The prices would have seen an upward revision, and that would have hurt the economy, the inflation would have shot up. And I think what the government and the oil companies are doing, these are in the best interest of the country and the economy.
Michael Kugelman, Russia's oil sale to India complicates President Biden's efforts to isolate Russia's economy?
Well, I think that certainly this decision by India, the optics of it don't look good from Washington, in the sense that India is not heavily dependent on Russian oil. It, of course, depends on oil from the Middle East for the majority of its needs, whereas the Europeans, who, of course, continue to import energy from Russia, are much more dependent on it than India is. But I think we're talking about a relatively small amount here, and I also think that energy cooperation has actually been a point of momentum for the U.S.-India relationship for the last few years.
Absolutely.
So I think Washington's hope will be to try to capitalize on those recent developments. In fact, in 2021, India was the top export destination for American oil, which is remarkable. And when Donald Trump was president and when he made his trip to India, there were several energy cooperation deals that came out of that. There's also been a new strategic energy partnership signed by the U.S. and India. So I think that's where the two sides should look, to avert tensions, to focus on that momentum.
India's imports from Russia aren't so much about crude oil, like we said, is a small percentage, but it's really more about our defense agreements with Russia. That also does rile up the U.S. But Ms. Kondrativa, how is this being seen in Russia? Because the U.S. sees India also as a critical partner to counter China's rising influence in Asia, and that's really what they're trying to convince India about where we need to stand on, when history is written, because this will affect China's growth in the whole neighborhood.
Yeah, definitely. This is very right. But I would like to mention that in Russia, the question of where India should stand in the history's books is never asked in that manner, and that's very important. I think the ongoing Ukraine crisis, the India's reaction to it, and the kind of talks we see between Moscow and New Delhi just shows once again that the two countries believe in the partnership that they have created over the years, be it defense, be it energy, which is also on the rise in terms of investment, not in terms of trade. It was never in terms of trade because of the logistics issues. And now when we say India is buying oil at discount, we should understand that a lot here is to do with logistics that probably Russia is going to take care of. And that's why it is at discount. So I think the cooperation will continue, including the defense trade. I've not seen any statements that something is going to hurt the defense trade because it was anyways done. I mean, the latest deals were done in the event of U.S. sanctions, the CATS sanctions. So the settlement between two countries are done in rupee, ruble, and other means that we don't really have a clarity about. But the deals were going on, the payments are going on. And I think if India could buy and if Russia could deliver things like S-400 last year, there are no reasons, whatever happens in Ukraine, and everyone hopes that diplomatically some agreements would be reached as soon as possible, that there are any problems for cooperation of our two countries.
All right, last question. I'm running out of time, so Manju said to you, but if you could come in on that whole China factor, that China aspect, because the US is trying to convince India that Russian action in Ukraine will embolden China in the neighborhood, and that really does complicate matters for India, even as we've had that summit between India and Japan part of the Quad, Japan, Australia and the US all trying to get India on board to join them in their stance against Russia. And of course, the carrot here is China.
China, of course, is an issue for us. They have been, there has been some sort of scaling down of their rhetoric or their approach to India. But yes, we need the US with us on countering China, and the US needs countering the effect of a belligerent and aggressive China in the Indo-Pacific. So we are in a situation where, on the one hand, we have to cooperate and balance. So India will have to balance its options and balance its relationship with the US, with Russia, and with China as well.
Of course,
Absolutely.
so a delicate diplomatic balancing act, not easy at this point of time. Thank you all for joining us on this debate tonight. Thank you for joining us on Left, Right and Centre. Bye-bye.